All right. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to some more FNAF reactions, and specifically more reactions to Seek of the Mimic, because this game is very confusing. I knew this going into it, and I knew while playing the game, and I also said it as well in my post reaction review of the game and everything, that this game is very confusing. And when it comes to the whole lore, timeline, story beats, what theories are made about the game and everything, I was very curious in what is going to be talked about in this game, because this game is very dense. It has a lot of stuff to talk about, but at the same time, though, the stuff that's in the game is very complicated. And one of the things that is very complicated is Moon.exe. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, Moon.exe is this like very weird, bizarre, like choose your own adventure game. It's a very meta game where the collectibles you pick up throughout your playthrough of Seek of the Mimic, the collectibles you pick up play a factor in Moon.exe. And yeah, it's a choose your own adventure game where you're presented these, scenarios, and it's like, oh, do I want to, open the window? Oh, I can't open the window because it's locked, so I have to find the key and everything. And the collectibles you pick up allow you to, be able to open the chest, to be able to get the key from the window and open the key and open the window and then climb out and everything. So it's very weird, very meta how the collectibles you find and you collect in in the game and everything play a factor in Moon.exe. And I said, while playing through the game and everything, that I guarantee is gonna be multiple endings, and then the good true ending, whatever that is gonna be tied to the Moon.exe game and everything. I said that, like, oh, you have to collect all, because I think there's like 25 collectibles you find. You have to collect all 25 collectibles, and then that will lead to like some secret, true, lore heavy, good ending. Um, so that's what I believe in my whole heart, is that is the purpose of Moon.exe. But I want to hear and what this theory is all about. But yeah, so there's some background information of what Moon.exe is. Let's find out about it. And also, oh, never mind. I'll just say one final thing, one connection that people have taught of Noon.exe is, but I was like, well, do I want to say that for the video? Because I don't know if we'll talk about the video. But all right, I guess I'll say it since it just crossed my mind. And if it comes in the video, well, I talked about it already. Like I brought up just a couple minutes ago, of how one of the things in Moon.exe, a big detail, is the window is locked and you go to a chest and you find a key and you unlock it and you unlock the window and you climb out and everything. People in my chat have connected that to FNAF 4, because FNAF 4, you have a kid who's locked in a room who's crying, right? And then having a bots with the key. FNAF 4, what's in the bots? Following Nightmare Mode, I want to say. Right? And then in Midnight Motorist, we see a house in a clearing in the woods that had someone, who was previously locked in a room because, Orange Mustard Man says, oh, I've told you not to, lock your door and everything, open the door and everything. And then you go out to the back and you see the window is broken out, right? And it's a mystery to this day of what Midnight Motorist means. Who's Orange Mustard Man? Who's the grandma in the chair? Who's the kid? Who was crying out? Who climbed out the window? Where did they go to? What was that place they climbed out to and went to? And then, oh, I'll be sorry when he gets back. There's animatronic, like, bare footprints, meaning what? There's a pile of dirt that we see that people have assumed is like a gravesite for something, right? It very, very confusing. Moral story, FNAF is confusing. But yeah, people connected to those details. FNAF 4 having finding keys, a locked box, climbing out a window, connecting that with what we see in Midnight Motors and FNAF 6, and then the story of FNAF 4. So I just want to call that out. If it comes in the video, well, there you go.
Secret of the Mimic gave us a lot to talk about, and I really want to get to what it means for the rest of the franchise, but we have a lot to talk about the game itself before we're ready to do anything else. Just as an example of how dense this game is, on Monday I released a full explainer video for the entire game, and I barely touched Moon.exe, a 40-minute side quest that...
Also, sorry about that, screen's flickering. But hey, you got to see the, I guess, secret, true, good ending of Princess Quest and Security Breach.
Unlocks the secret ending. Because, like, what is that, and what could it possibly mean? Well, I've slept on it. And I think that Moon.exe is not only Fiona's perfect vision of the future, but it's also impossible. So Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So, like I said, what is Moon.exe? On every monitor in the game, one of the options is to run Moon.exe, and it pulls up a basic text-based adventure, but for the sake of ease, it's pre-recorded responses instead of typing in every possible solution. But as you play Secret of the Mimic, all the collectibles you collect end up inside of Moon.exe, and if you have all 25, you're able to beat it to access the secret ending. So that being said, what is the actual game story of Moon.exe? Like, what is happening in the game itself directly? Not a metaphor. What is this game? Well, we the player are trying to escape from Moon. Any misstep and Moon will force us back to sleep, starting over. But, of course, to make it playable, you just restart at your most recent checkpoint. The player begins trapped inside a boarded up bedroom, but they escape out the window to see a cave and a forest. If you try to enter the cave immediately, Moon stops you and sends you back to bed. So you enter the forest and meet a baby owl. Throughout the forest, you can pet the owl, play with the owl, and even feed the owl at different points. And in the woods, we encounter a lot of different areas. There's a statue of a wedding couple where the man has a bow tie and the woman is burnt. There's a ruined seamstress,
which, one being burnt, man, you know, that could be a connection to Afton, which that's probably a huge stretch of imagination. But the reason why I say that is a lot of the Fazbear Frights and Tales of the Pizza Putz books have tackled, like, you know, mothers being absent, single fathers, abusive dads, bad dads, and, well, who's the most recurring father in the series? William Afton. Right. And we also believe that William Afton's wife, who has never been identified, goes on to be in Ballora, or at least in her image. So she's not in the picture, aka she would be burned.
Shop that's been burnt to the ground, a lake next to a big rock, and eventually you find a cabin tucked away deep inside the woods. And
FNAF 4 house, deep in the woods.
Inside that cabin is an old woman who calls herself Sun, and she tells us to fix 3 masks to earn a reward: a bear mask, a foxy mask, and a rabbit mask. If you do this, she gives you the baby owl mask. Put it on will allow us to get past Moon to get inside the cave. But
putting on masks. Interesting. Because, hold up. One of the most iconic images in the entire series. If we look at this, our current image that has broken this series and has made us question everything about what we know, and which is very reminiscent because this game has also made you question everything that you know. Everything we've been told may have been a lie, which is very reminiscent of Help Wanted, where it's like this very meta game where it's like, oh, the stories have been told are now just spooky ghost stories, right? By like Fazbear Entertainment, because the rogue indie game developer has like been lying to us. If I pull up this screenshot, there it is. There you go. So we're talking about masks, right? And a lot of details that I previously mentioned that I said in the intro about FNAF 4. Well, if you look very clearly, these are masks, right? So you have a Freddy, a Foxy, a Bonnie, and a. Technically, it's a Chica, but remember, Chica's a bird. So it could be Chica the chicken, but also has been a duck at one point, or Chica the owl, which would be weird because Chica's not an owl, but you get the point. A bird creature mask. Look at FNAF 4. Right. And this is like something that I've, you know, said in a previous theory. I can't remember exactly when, but very recently, this image of the bully's friends, the Foxy Bro and his friends, bullying the FNAF 4 Crying Child throughout the nights and FNAF 4. I've said that I was a little bit hesitant in this idea of getting a ton of backstory with these four characters because did we really, like, for all the questions, all the lore implications, all the assumptions that we as the community have thought about this series, what we have thought we've always known everything, getting clarification and like backstories for these four characters to me has never been seen as the highest of priorities. But I will not deny that there's a ton of evidence and that very recently in the most recent games in the series, they have tackled this exact idea of getting these characters, these friends with these masks that we see in FNAF 4, a backstory. Right? The person, the Bonnie mask, we believe to be Cassie's dad, who was a Fazbear technician that we heard about in FNAF Ruin, that is also the character we play as in FNAF VR Help 1 and 2. Right? So they would also be connected to the Mimic AR network. Foxy Bro is the older brother of the FNAF 4 Crying Child, and we believed at one point Foxy Bro was Michael Afton, but then the FNAF security logbook said the Crying Child is Michael Afton. So then it changed to, oh, now he's back to Foxy Bro, but now it's back to Michael Afton being Foxy Bro. So Foxy Bro being Michael Afton, it's still a can of worms right now. And then you have the Freddy one, which in Into the Pit, if I'm not mistaken, if you go into the attic and into the pit, one of the things you can find is a Freddy mask, and it's tradable. And recap throughout Into the Pit, having a tradable item is important because you, as Oswald, go to the library and you trade with, is it Jet? Is his name Jet? I can't remember. I played the playthrough like a month ago, so I should remember. But one of the things you can trade is a Freddy mask. And it's not saying that Oswald or Jet or the person that you trade is the Freddy bully we see in FNAF 4, but Oswald's dad is the Freddy person right here. Person with the Freddy mask is Oswald's dad. Right? And then you only have one. The person in the Chica mask, aka the owl mask. Right? So, as much as I don't like it, it would be very ignorant of me to not admit that the most recent games in FNAF have tackled the same idea, is going back to this frame, this image in FNAF 4, and given each of these characters in the mask a backstory. In Secret of the Mimic, it seems to be the Chica character. That's their backstory. That's why in Moon.exe, you now have an owl mask. Right? So, the character we play as in Secret of the Mimic is tied to this character in the Chica mask. Maybe. Maybe David, part of the Mimic programming, that's who is there. I don't know. It's hard to say at the moment. But 100%, this owl mask is tied to the Chica mask that we see in FNAF 4. Right? As much as I don't like it, to me, I have to call it out and see it as I see it. And the way I see it is the most recent FNAF games have tackled the same idea, is going back to that image and giving each of those bullies a backstory. This game is that. Filling the final piece.
Once we receive that mask, the baby owl is gone. When we enter the cave, Moon sees us wearing the baby owl mask and begins to cry. Inside is a statue of the baby owl, with the text, "You will bring him back, no matter the cost." Throughout the cave are ancient ruins of a workshop, filled with broken statues and incomplete projects, until eventually we find a statue with no arms or a head. Piecing the statue together, we create Moon. It sings and is reborn. We then fade through white and suddenly we're at the welcome show of Murray's Costume Manor. But if you speak to Mr. Helper, he says, "You rebuilt yourself, but now you are split in two. Moon and sun, destruction and life." I got a new fur thing. Let's see if it works. Been waiting to try this out. I mean, it's getting some of it, but it's not as effective as like a lint roller. It's a little disappointing, frankly. I don't know if it's just user error or what. Yeah, like it's getting some of the fur, but it's not super working. It was only like $5. During this second half of Moon.exe, we go room through room, pretty much recreating the exact story of Secret of the Mimic, but now instead of defeating the animatronics, we're helping them. We're either giving them something they want or fixing the situation around them so they can find peace and be happy. Well, all except for Jackie, who we suck into rain boots to never be seen again. That part's weird. But Big Top, Dolly, and Chica all seem better because we visited them. They all have their problems solved. And it's also notable that when we give the Fall Fest ticket book to Big Top, he says, "This is
Tickets, please." So I can't do that. That's the best impression I'm going to get out of it.
the one. This is where Sun left, leaving them behind. And once we help all the animatronics, we end up in David's room, to which we place his 3 birthday presents in 3 chests, open the closet door, and upgrade our data diver in Moon.exe. Once we've done this, we're able to talk to Sun one more time. "You have found my presents, you have completed my tasks. Now you will get your reward. Use this to bring him back. It's all in your hands now." And we receive the glitched permission, which allows us to access several secret doors in the manor to access the 3rd secret ending. And then it's over. So after playing through this, the first question is, what did any of that mean? Obviously, this story seems to be a massive allegory, frankly,
That was awesome. Right. That was such a bizarre moment, being in multiple Springlock suits in Secret of the Mimic, and just the Mimic not being able to recognize you and just waving. It was cute, but also took me out because, I don't know, just like being part of the series from the very beginning and hearing the dangers of a Springlock suit and like how unsafe they are and how they really should not exist and how no one should realistically be in a Springlock suit, but have it be not only a mechanic in Secret of the Mimic recurring multiple times, and it being like, you know, like this, where it's like, oh, played off for laughs and everything. It's very interesting, right? Because, yeah, Springlock suits are very dangerous because you basically skewer, or you basically sardine your body into one of these suits with the Springlock, you know, metal mechanisms, you know, pressing very tightly into your skin, right? And any moisture, any water, like anything gets into the suit, into the Springlocks, they snap shut and skewer your body from the inside out, right? Which is very graphic and very dark, but you just hop into many suits throughout the Secret of the Mimic, and you're just fine.
A very thinly veiled allegory. But if so, the question that needs to be answered is, what is this an allegory for? Well, the first step to figuring out what the allegory is trying.
Which, the reason why I bring up this Spring Luck stuff and how it's just funny is this game, the series, just desensitizes you to a lot. Because, very, very similarly, you have to think about it. FNAF is a series that is about child murder, which is very dark and disturbing. But just being honest, it's a series about kids getting lured into a back room, killed brutally, and never to be seen again. It's very dark, depressing, sad, and twisted, right? But, very clearly, the series with death and child murder, it desensitizes you to a lot. And then you stop and think about it, we're like, this is child murder, this is spring lock suits that are very dangerous where they can skewer you from the inside out. But the series just played off for laughs and there's a bunch of memes about it as well. So it's just very interesting. And you stop and think about it like, wait, this series is actually very, very dark.
To say is nailing down what the characters are supposed to be representing. So let's go over a few anchors that make the most sense. And I think the first one that's most evident is Sun. F10N4, or Leet Speech for Fiona, the robotic version of Fiona, uses that exact same face when she talks to us. It's the M1 personality inside of the MXES console that we see at the end of the pizzeria segment. Because in that segment she uses the exact same face to talk to us, but that's not all. Big Top says Fall Fest took Sun from us forever, and we have audio logs that say the human Fiona went to Fall Fest, and Edwin Murray's first log after she died is, "Why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there," which is seeming to say that she died at Fall Fest. If that's true, Moon.exe actually has some more to say about this, where the married couple statue has the woman be fully burned, and at her feet is a snow globe for Fall Fest. And not only that, but in the woods there's that ruined seamstress building that's burnt to the ground, and Fiona was excellent at sewing together hand puppets. So
That's a good point. So I guess retract my previous statement about the statue of the man and then the burned woman being William Afton and his wife, which once again, we don't know her identity. We don't know anything about her. So I guess remove that thought because Fiona and Edwin actually fits a lot better. But then again, though, am I wrong? Am I biased to want to have an answer on what William Afton's wife is? Have a backstory? Something? Is she Ballora? Is she not? I don't know. Call it, what is it? It's, confirmation bias. I am indeed streaming, and we're watching it right now, so please don't spoil anything. I think Moon is Edwin. So Sun is Fiona, or F10 N4, Leet Speak, which is very weird and bizarre. And Edwin is Moon. Yeah, I can see that.
seems pretty definitive.
But we're still early on, so I'm still trying to tackle this as we go.
That Sun is meant to be Fiona.
Yes, 100%.
Or at least, I think specifically, M1, or F10 and 4, the robotic recreation of Fiona.
Whether the human version of Fiona was like her soul, her consciousness was uploaded into the Mitz's machine, right? Like, that's something that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. The Secret of the Mimic twist that Fiona, the person that we've heard audio tapes throughout the game and everything, is in the Mitz's machine, right? Whether she was a person at all, her soul was put into the Mitz's machine, because we know she was a human at some point. And we believe Fiona died at Fall Fest, which, if I'm not mistaken, from a DLC email something. I can't remember exactly what, but from FNAF AR, the game that has a ton of story but doesn't exist anymore, which is very, very bizarre. And it's weird how we keep mentioning that game even though it doesn't exist technically. Um, they mentioned Fall Fest and the place gets burned down. I want to say it took place in 1983. Or no, 70 something. I'm just trying to wrap my head around. I have a lot to say very clearly. I have a lot to say. I'm just trying to wrap my head around all these thoughts as I go in the moment. So that's why I'm rambling, right? Because I'm talking about Fiona, talking about Sun and Moon. I'm talking about Fall Fest. I'm talking about the AR game that doesn't exist anymore. I'm talking about the Mitz's machine. I'm talking about her soul consciousness. You can see why the FNAF story gets complicated. But, okay, start from the beginning. We know Fiona was a human at some point, and she went to Fall Fest and presumably died in the fire that we hear about in the FNAF AR game. And we know she was a person at some point because in the tapes we see in one of the secret endings in Secret the Mimic, you see the robot endoskeleton version of Fiona in mimic form. And people have relayed that to be in the M1. M1 being the like first version of the mimic, right? So Fiona is M1, the first like incarnation of the mimic software. And then David, who died later, would be the M2, the later version, the following version of the M1 software, but was the aggressive one because Edwin saw the mimic software that reminded him of his dead son, beat it, and then the mimic version of that infused with violence and agony, and now has homicidal tendencies that we hear about from Hanyu at the beginning of the game in the trailer, especially. And then we also hear about it in the tapes as well. Throughout the game. That now has homicidal tendencies and mimicking what Edwin did to it with other people now. So, got all that? Think that makes sense? I hope. So, yeah, she was human at some point. I'm also trying to remember, like, wait, how did I get on this topic to begin with? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, she was human at one point. But here's what's so bizarre about it. And one of the reasons why I said in the intro, and I also said in the review as well, of how this game has a lot of stuff. Like, it's very, very dense. Like, this game talks about a lot and it shows us a lot. But at the same time, though, it's very overwhelming. It's very confusing. And how does it all connect? Right? And what I mean by that, like, it is a big deal seeing what we thought was the human version of Fiona to now be connected to the Mitz's machine to be F10 and 4 that we see in this room that you're seeing on this picture right here. Right? But that's the Mitz's machine. Right? Which is weird. Because, I guess, recap from Ruin. Mitz's is the giant blue bunny that you see throughout the game in Ruin. And its purpose is trying to prevent you, the player, as Cassie, trying to stop you, send animatronics to your location to stop you and kill you, right? But remember, it's trying to prevent you from shutting down the security nodes throughout the Pizza Plats. Because Cassie believes that shutting down the security nodes is saving Gregory, who's trapped down under the Rotsi Raceway. But obviously, it's not Gregory, it's the Mimic the whole time. right? So you think Mitsis is a villain the entire time, but turns out Mitsis is actually the hero of that story, and Cassie's a villain, right? Mitsis is preventing you from shutting down the security because once all this security is shut off, the Mitsis able to the Mitsis software shuts down, and the mimic is able to roam freely because there's no stopping it because the security is shut down, right? And that's how the game ends. So, for a lack of a better term, what all that being said, Mitsis is a security protocol that is tied to the mimic and is there to prevent it from escaping being free. Right? Just Cliff Notes summary, that's how I've always interpreted what Mitsis is. It's a security program that's meant to keep the mimic locked away. Right? That's how I've always interpreted it, ever since Ruin. But now we get to this game, and Mitsis is now Fiona, who is a mimic program herself. And her dead son is also a mimic, but is the violent version. So it's a security program that is there to keep the mimic locked away, but now is also a mimic themselves. You see why this is confusing? So yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the Mitsis machine we see in Ruin and the Mitsis machine we see in Seek of the Mimic. Now, I guess one way you could interpret it is this would be very, very bizarre, but I guess one way you could logic it out from a time perspective is we know Seek of the Mimic takes place in 1974, 1975, takes place in the 70s. And we know the security breach, Ruin, Pizza Plutz era is in the 2020s, right? So, like, maybe what started out as the Fiona machine later, 50, 60 years later, evolved into the Mitsis machine that we see in Ruin as now a security protocol that was infused and became a security protocol by Cassie's dad, the Phasma technician that we assume we play as in FNAF VR Help 1 and 2. I don't know. That's one way you could interpret it from a time perspective. That's what my brain has just come to as I'm talking about it in the moment. So maybe I have to, think about it a lot more and everything. But that's the way, from a time perspective, my brain is at least logicking it out. I don't know if it's true or not. I find it cool how the original designs and Springlocks are made by MCM and not Henry and Afton, and we finally find out they are not nice to Edwin. Security Breach and Ruin are 2030s, yep. And Seek of the Mimic is definitely 1979. Okay, 79. I just know it was some point in the 70s because it briefly flashed the year in the trailer. But 70s. The point is, 70s here, 2030s here, a lot could happen. For instance, real life, I want to say in the 90s, we still had, brick, phones, landlines. But now, 2020s, you have phones where, if you told people back in the 70s, hey, I can use my face to, unlock the phone or pay for stuff, they'd be like, what is this futuristic stuff? A lot could happen. So, maybe. But get back to the point about these spring locks are made by Edwin. It's cool, yes. But it makes me question, where does the story go? And what I mean by that is, like let's just think about this for a second. So, if the Springlock suits were made by Edwin, William Afton Henry had nothing to do with the Springlock suits in the 70s, right? They came later, right? So let's pretend that. So that would mean the Springlock Fredbear Golden Freddy suit that we see Henry wear in the books, and the Springlock Golden Bonnie suit that William Afton wears, that he would go on to be his iconic Springtrap suit and would be infamous in the suit that he wears to kill kids, that would later become the missing children's incident that we also see in Into the Pit, right? Wasn't created by them. Okay, fine. Right? If that's what happens, that's what happens. But then it makes you question, so if Edwin made those suits, so then it makes you question, what did William Afton even do? What suits did he make? Because if we're saying the Springlock suits, which are very, very important in the series and led to so many things later in the timeline, from the animatronic timeline, so to speak, if Edwin was the originator of that and not Henry and William Afton, then what did William Afton do? What did he create? And then, even more so, what did Henry create? What did Henry do? Because, just think about these implications for a second. Henry and Edwin have, at one point, I hate saying that, but at one point, they were seen as the same person, right? You know, a little YouTuber, streamer, currently wearing the red Indiana shirt, you know, may preach the gospel that they were the same person. I don't know, you may have heard of him, I don't know, maybe. Sounds crazy. Probably a crazy person. Anyway, they kept proposing the idea that they were the same person because their backstories are the exact same. They are genius inventors that are able to make futuristic, way before their time, animatronics, and seems like magic. They both have a young child who would later die, and said dead child is now being rebuilt in robot form, and now said robot form of dead child reminds grieving father of their dead child, and they now are infused with grief and agony, and, you know, take a steel pipe and beat the robot creation just out of agony and anger. And then the robot creation, with now infused agony, goes on to have those homicidal, you know, beating tendencies, becomes a villain, and starts killing people. In the books, with Henry's case, it was a trolley bot that would later become Baby, that we know in Sister Location and beyond. And in Edwin, it was the Mimic, in this case, M2, who is now David, I guess. At least I've always interpreted M2 as David. Because M1 is Fiona and M2 is David, as I previously mentioned. Have I done all the endings? I have played through Seek of the Mimic. I technically got the bad ending where you go through the Tiger Rock section and the Mimic is in the van and presumably kills you. But I have seen all the endings of Seek of the Mimic.
Fiona. After all, the real son left long ago. All that's left is the son we know in the woods. I'm gonna be super real. I'm behind, and I have not had any time to record a real gamer subsad, but you should get some, and is not human. And this is mainly from the sun and moon illusion near the middle of the game. where we create the statue of Moon, fade to white, and then the next thing we hear is Mr. Helpful telling us that we are Sun and Moon. We have rebuilt ourselves. So I don't really see a human rebuilding themselves into Sun Moon. That doesn't quite make sense to me. So if we're considering our player as being non-human, what non-human characters are there to pick from? Well, frankly, it's just the Mimic. But when I say that, something that we need to clear up, and this game helps us to, what Mimic am I referring to? Throughout the game we play, we have the Mimic endoskeleton chasing us down, but we also have a few emails that lists M1 and M2 separately. And the endoskeleton we see in-game is violent and trying to kill us, but we see tapes of that same endoskeleton pretending to be Fiona. So, which is it?
M1 is Fiona. M2, the one that wants to kill us, is M2, David. The one that's beaten and has the homicidal tendencies. Because in Edwin's office, we hear M2, or we hear broken Edwin talk about how he, can't feel his legs and everything. Call out saying, M2, help me, fits my legs, all the stuff and everything, call for help and everything. And M2, being able to mimic Edwin's voice and everything, is like taunting him everything, saying like, oh, my legs are, perfect now. He talks about how, reminder in the book and everything, Edwin was an overworked parent and everything, where he was not allowing any, child time, any father-son time with his son David. So that's why M2, when like the audio recording would say like, oh, daddy's busy, maybe we can play some other time, basically mimicking and mocking what Edwin used to do to David.
What's going on here? Well, we know from this email that M2 was originally a copy of M1's programming, and from an audio log from Edwin, M2 is hard to create. He made M1 and M1 was successful, but he's not even sure how, and he's having trouble replicating that with M2. From the tone of the email, I think it's incredibly likely that M1 is F10 and 4, that robotic recreation of Fiona's personality in the Mimic, which is then renamed to the F10 and M1 and M.
Sorry about that. Mouse is being very weird. Okay. Apologies. Mouse, work properly.
M1 was successful, but he's not even sure how, and he's having trouble replicating that with M2. From the tone of the email, I think it's incredibly likely that M1 is F10 and 4, that robotic recreation of Fiona's personality in the Mimic. Essentially, the way I think that this whole Mimic scenario works is that the original schematics for the Mimic are the initial program that can replicate any personality, and M1 is the first successful branch that fully replicated one person, that person being Fiona. And Edwin is having trouble trying to do it again with M2. Not to mention, by the time of Secret of the Mimic, M1, or F10 and 4, is no longer in the Mimic endoskeleton. She's inside the MXES console, which is then renamed to the F10 and 4, where I keep getting that lead speech for Fiona. And I know it's supposed...
This is gonna sound like I'm nitpicking, but technically F10 and 4 was later renamed to MXES, because once again, Secret of the Mimic, 1970s, the Mimic regime we see in ruin, 2030s.
Supposed to be pronounced Fiona, but if I just say Fiona for both of these characters, it's gonna get confusing really quickly.
Yep, that definitely didn't help at all.
So you could argue there's three characters here. There's M1/F10 and 4, the robotic recreation of Fiona, but specifically the personality. There's M2, a failed copy of that program that never really saw fruition, but is currently in the Mimic endoskeleton hunting us down, that has parts of David and Edwin's personality inside of it, and the Mimic endoskeleton itself, which seems to be able to have either one take over. So M1 is the first dataset that replicated Fiona, and M2 was supposed to replicate David, but after being beaten by Edwin, it all started to go awry. So when I say I think the player of Moon.exe is the Mimic, what of these characters am I referring to? I think it makes the most sense to be specifically the Mimic endoskeleton with a brand new Mimic program inside of it, because M1 would have to be Sun, and M2 shouldn't have been created yet because David is still alive as the baby owl at the beginning of this game. So that's Sun, the baby owl, and the player. What other weird characters do we have to line up here? Because, like, obviously Big Top is still Big Top. Well, at this point, we're running low on characters we still haven't solved yet, so I think we can pretty definitively solve Moon. I know it's tempting to say since Sun is M1, Moon must be M2, but that's
right. I mean, that's, what is it? It's the simplest answer is the right answer. Yeah, if something's gonna be Sun, obviously you would think the next following thing would be Moon. Because very clearly, ever since Security Breach, very clearly Sun and Moon have been connected.
not quite.
And we know also, this should not be like new, because I've talked about in the past how Sun and Moon very clearly is a gesture that was made at the time of the Mimic. Right.
Quite it, I think. Especially because
their keyboard, I know I keep pausing on apologies, but just thoughts keep coming in my head, the teeth in Sun and Moon have like piano key teeth, which is the exact same teeth we see in the Mimic from Ruin, aka Sun and Moon would have been made at the same time as the Mimic.
I believe once we receive the baby owl mask, that is the Mimic receiving M2, but we'll get there when we get there. So how do we then figure out who the Moon character is? Well, if the player is the Mimic endoskeleton, what does Moon do to us? Every time we make a misstep or stray too far, he puts us back to bed and we restart our journey. Almost like someone is watching the Mimic endoskeleton and trying to keep it contained and reset it in some way. That, plus the fact that M1 or Sun is Fiona, leads me to believe that Moon in Moon.exe is meant to represent Edwin, someone who's keeping tabs on the Mimic, trying to keep it contained, and when is presented with the baby owl mask, bursts into tears and gives up.
Sun is Fiona and Edwin is Moon. Okay, I'm on board with that.
So we have our characters, then what is this story trying to tell us? Well, like I mentioned at the top, I think Moon.exe is the ideal scenario and storyline that M1 wants to see made real. It's all she wants, it's everything she wants, but it's also impossible. So what does M1 want? I believe M1 or F10N4 tells us exactly what she wants. She even tries to tell Edwin, but he's not having it. She wants her child back. In making a copy of the Mimic that replicated Fiona, he essentially made a perfect motherly robot, a digital creation whose only purpose is to watch and take care of a child. And then due to Edwin's neglect, that child died. Imagine what this robot must be going through if your entire purpose for your entire creation is taken away from you. We even get a little bit of this in one of Fiona's best lines in the game, when you're leaving on the elevator and she says,
"I miss you, but I miss my child."
I think Moon.exe is M1 telling Arnold through the system exactly what she wished could have happened. So then, what does this allegory mean in the real world if it's what M1 wanted to happen in the first place? Well, to figure that out, it's time to do some analysis. Some literary analysis! Thanks for hitting the subscribe button.
W. So same time as the Mimic, Sun always puts you back in Moon. If he is M2, then it will make sense why he would want to kill you. Puts you back and looks like after Fiona. I don't know. Like, ever since Security Breach, Sun and Moon very clearly, I mean, as the name goes, very clearly they are polar opposite. Like, Sun is like the happy one who, wants to, drink fast with you. Fizz fast, whatever it's called. And Moon is the aggressive one that, is aggressive when the lights go off and everything and kills you. But Sun never hunts you down. Right? So since they're polar opposites, you would think Sun being Fiona, then who's the polar opposite of Fiona would be tied to Moon then. So I can believe it be Edwin. I can believe it. The whole thing about wanting to keep an AI programming at bay and keep tabs on it. AKA, that's Moon saying, hey, you're straying too far from the path and everything. Get back on the course. I can see that. That makes sense.
The story of Moon.exe in the real world is, in my belief, as follows. We are the Mimic. Right now, M1 may or may not be inside of our endo. Nothing here is quite one-to-one with the real world, especially the beginning of this program. But right now we feel compelled to spend time with David, and we do so. We take care of him, play with him, feed him. It's almost like he's our own son. Almost. He isn't quite our son though, is he? We're a robot, he's a human. But M2 could be. M2 could be our real child, but Edwin isn't able to make it work. He was able to make M1, a version of the Mimic that became Fiona quite well, but making another persona from a copy of our own programming was proving too difficult. And it's at this point that Sun gives the player the owl mask, or Fiona gives something to the Mimic. What does that mean here? Well, if we're the Mimic, and we receive the owl mask, in my mind this is a clear indicator that we receive the personality of...
What about Eclipse? Could that mean there is M3, or could it be represent how the M2 programming has Edwin and David? I don't know. Eclipse is odd because, well, then again, what in the series is not odd. But yeah, Eclipse is like the half Dragon Ball fusion of Sun and Moon. Right, Eclipse. So it has like the aggressive tendencies of Moon still, at least some of them, but has like the, lighthearted appearance of Sun. I would say as one interpretation, it being, David and Edwin as like M2, that could be Eclipse. I think that's one way to look at it. Especially because we know M2 possesses the soul code mimicking the copy of David, right? M2 is a copy of David. I don't know if it's soul or something, right? For lack of a better term. But we know from the tapes that M2 is able to mimic Edwin following the attack. So, having David's like persona code in the mimic in M2, but also is able to reach around and copy Edwin, two souls. I don't want to say attacking, but two souls like coming to consciousness at the same time and to see who's in control and everything could be what we're seeing Eclipse and everything, which is very, very interesting because as I'm talking about it, that's something that happens in the books. Is in one of the Faster Frights books, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it talked about this, of how there was it was almost like two kids were in a Golden Freddy suit, Golden Freddy Springlock suit, mind you, and one person was on the top half, and they were able to be the eyes and ears, they were able to see what was going on, everything. But then there was another soul in the bottom half of the body. They were able to I want to say move the legs and maybe the arms as well, but they were able to see what was going on. And we as theorists, when we saw the book and everything, we equated that to, not only quite literally, where Golden Freddy can have, that's basically the book telling us that Golden Freddy has multiple spirits inside of him, which that could be the eventual spirit Cassidy, but also the FNAF 4 Crying Child. That could be explaining that. But also any other animatronics we see in the series could also have a time where multiple souls could be in an animatronic. And that could be the same with what we're seeing with Eclipse, with the Mimic software, where it's the body incarnation of David, but is also reaching out and having Edwin's persona as well. Maybe.
David, right?
Moon could be Edwin and M2 because M2 is pretty much Edwin, yeah.
Mask or disguise of the baby owl. But here's where things get confusing. When you receive the baby owl mask, the baby owl disappears from the game. If you ask Sun where it went, she smiles and said he flew away. And if you check her stove before you receive the owl mask and your baby owl is alive, her stove is cold and not being used. But after we receive the owl mask, her stove is on, and something on it smells like chicken. Moon.exe is directly implying that Sun killed the baby owl to make the baby owl mask. And following our allegory, that would mean that M1 killed David.
Ha. Wait, play that again? Because if so, that is very different. And that's not where I was thinking it was going at all.
That Sun killed the baby owl to make the baby owl mask. And following our...
Sun killed the baby owl to get the baby owl mask. Sun being Fiona. Baby owl being David, I guess. Get the mask would be the Mimic software, so then David would be M2. Right. At least that... Right? Am I interpreting that the right way? Sun being Fiona kills baby owl being David, to get the baby owl mask. Baby owl mask being the like robot M2 Mimic. Right? Get what she wants. Right? Yeah. So oh no. Like that's way different than what I remember, because there's not much detail in how David dies, at least in the books, when this is what the game's based on, is the book. Because all we know is David is playing with the ball in like a scrapyard junkyard. The ball goes in the street. David chases after the ball and gets hit by a car and dies. And he was, I think, 4. Like, that's all we know. Right? That's all we know. And we see in one of the tapes, we see a ball go across one of the tapes and everything. Like, oh, is that the infamous ball where David died and everything? And then another tape, it calls out saying, oh, David's playing outside. Can you go retrieve him for his birthday? Right? So, and that was Edwin telling Fiona and Mimic form M1, telling, oh, go retrieve David. He's, outside and everything. Basically implying that Fiona killed David then, which would cause Edwin to go into grief, make M2, and have the homicidal tendencies. Huh. So if that's the case, then Fiona is way more of a villain than we gave them credit for. Like, them doing that quite literally started everything then.
Huh. For allegory, that would mean that M1 killed David, which seems really out of place. Like, don't get me wrong, M1 or the Mimic would have means and opportunity to kill David. After all, on the birthday he died, the Mimic was the only one sent out to the playground to go get him.
Right.
The playground that's right next to a very dangerous shipping yard
Junkyard.
that the Mimic could have just opened and let him inside of, thus leading to the accident. But even though means and opportunity are there, there's not a clear motive here. As far as we're aware, like I mentioned, M1's primary objective is being a mother. And sure, David isn't technically M1's child, but in all the footage we have of M1, she treated David like her son, calling him darling, watching after him, taking him to birthday parties. So suddenly killing David seems very out of character. So then, if she did, why would she have? Well,
Then Mitz's wanting to keep M2 in the same area with her, suggests that she wants to keep her son with her. Yeah. Because I think that's what the motive was, is M1, Fiona saw David, but because he wasn't in robot form, that's what gave them the motive to kill them then. And that's why Fiona says, you know, I miss you, Edwin, but I, being the motherly figure, miss their child more. But yeah, that seems very out of character. Is Fiona having this like elaborate plan to, you know, kill the child and lead to all this?
I actually have an idea for this, but this video is already quite long and it's a whole separate theory, so you'll have to wait for a future video for my explanation, but I'll give you a teaser now.
And very, very soon, depends on when that theory is, hopefully I will be reacting to said video soon. So stay tuned for that.
I think M1 figured out why she's successfully able to copy Fiona, and it has to do with going through her own memory banks and seeing her own creation. But meanwhile, M2 was not successful in copying whatever Edwin was trying to have it copy yet. And there's one key thing that made M1 successful that she might need for M2 to be successful. Regardless, back to Moon.exe, once we receive the baby owl mask, the moon cries when he sees us and we can get into the cave. Or rather, as an allegory, in M1's perfect version of events, once Edwin sees that M2 successfully copied David, Edwin is left powerless to stop us and we enter the factory. M2 then goes through this abandoned factory until eventually he finds enough pieces to build himself a body. Sun, Moon.
So eclipsed but not broken, which is what we see in Ruin. And yeah, this is what I was talking about earlier with Eclipse, where, you know, you have the red eye of Moon, but you have like the glowing eye of Sun. Right? And oh, there's the very famous piano keyboard teeth I was talking about, where it's the same as the Mimic.
The daycare attendant from Security Breach. Now, I want to be very clear here. Yes, the visual depiction is just Moon, but keep in mind the very next dialogue we get is Mr. Helpful literally saying, "You are Sun and Moon." But think about what this means. In Fiona's perfect version of these events, M2, once it realizes that it is Fiona's son, makes a new body for itself that's half sun and half moon. Literally a replica of a child of two people, half and half, pieces from both. And now that he's all grown up with his own body, he begins the journey to let Fiona out of Mexis so she can re-enter the Mimic and they can both live in the physical world together.
So if that's the case, then, if Eclipse came first, then my question is, how does, you know, Sun on his own exist? And how does the Moon character exist? Like, on their own. Right? You go from Eclipse, how does Sun get created on their own, and then how does Moon get created on their own? Because they're called the daycare attendants, right? And based on the statues we see in Security Breach, before Ruin happens, like, there's statues of them separate, being their own bodies, being their own beings, right? Very intentionally, they are separate things. So how? I'll say that's my question. If Eclipse came before then, how does Sun and Moon, separate, come afterwards? When is a FNAF going to drop a theory vid on Secret the Mimic? Not too sure. I hope soon, because I want to know as much as I can about this game. And very similar to the tease, when they do make a said theory, I'll be reacting to it.
So her perfect son goes through the Murray's Costume Manor facility and assists all of the animatronics in finding peace and finding rest, giving Big Top as many tickets as he could ever want, fixing Dolly's animatronics, visiting Chica and giving her that birthday party she's looking for, and eventually he makes it back to his home, where he finds the rest of his memories and is able to disable Cradle.exe, which lets Fiona out of Mexus, where she can re-enter the Mimic endoskeleton. He saves himself so he can go back and save his mother. And at the very end, when the story is over, Fiona talks to us, the player, Arnold, directly. She showed us this vision, and from how we responded to it, she is confident that we could be the ones to set things right and finally help M2 reclaim itself. And in doing so, she trusts us with the glitch permission that lets us get there. In other words, all of this, Moon.exe in general, seems to be a test for any Fazbear employee who walks in here, and Arnold just so happens to be someone who could have passed. Arnold could have seen M1's perfect scenario, responded correctly, and received the tools to make the best solution out of what is currently in front of us. But it's one that's impossible. Not only is that not what happens as Arnold goes through the facility and destroys several of these animatronics, but the only way to beat Moon.exe is to have every collectible. And one of the most important ones, the White Tiger plushie, only spawns randomly after you've beaten the game and start New Game Plus. It's a plushie that doesn't exist for Arnold. So unfortunately, Fiona's perfect story can never be, and that's why she's still trying to make it happen to this day, I think anyway. But that's just Moon.exe. What do the endings themselves mean? Well, that we'll probably leave for next week, because the ending...
What's the true ending of Secret the Mimic? Is it the bad ending where you just play through the game normally? Which, let's face it, that's never been how FNAF has ever operated, where you just play through the game normally. Ever since FNAF 3, that's never been the true ending. Is it the one where you go against the program, you go against the Mimic, and then you get sent to the Freddy Pizzeria Simulator, or Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Establishment, and you get some animatronic chasing you that is a weird conglomeration of, like, the core for animatronics. You have, like, Fotzi's Pirate Hook. You have, like, a head of, like, Chica, then also, like, a foot of Chica from FNAF 1. It's, like, an amalgamation of, like, 10 different animatronics at once. It's very, very bizarre. Or is the Moon.exe, where you get into David's bedroom, then you read that story, is that the true ending? Because, believe it or not, each has their own implications of, if this is the true ending, then this happens. Like, for instance, in David's bedroom, like the story I talked about, it's, you have to, there's like a large panel, and you have to press a certain animatronic, certain figure at a certain time to read the entire story. Because David M2, the Mimic program, is starting to get aggressive, but when you press the right character in the storybook, it's able to calm down and be back to David, right? it's very interesting because the four characters, the four animatronics you push to get to that story, it's Bonnie, or it's a Bonnie figure, Fotsy, Chica, and then a gator. Yeah. The four characters you press for this storybook to calm M2 and to get that ending is a bunny, a fox, a chicken, and a gator. Not a bear. Which is very, very bizarre. And I said this in one of I think the last theory video we did, but gonna be repeating myself as always, because you know what? That's just what happens. But it's very interesting because when you think of a gator, you immediately think of Monty. And you think of Monty because we know throughout the game of Security Breach, Monty was, someone who was aggressive. They had an ego. They were jealous that Freddy had the spotlight. And they would do anything they can to be at center stage and be in the spotlight. That's why at one point, people believe that Monty's the one who killed Glamrock Bonnie, so Monty can be the new bass player, so he can be more in the spotlight. We also know, I want to say it's either in Ruin or in Gator Golf in Ruin, or it's in Monty's boss fight in Security Breach. When you go into Monty Golf, you see like the side the stage, you see a dumpster, and in the dumpster is a broken down Glamrock Freddy animatronic. And a giant holographic figure of Monty is the one in the center stage. So very clearly, Monty has some animosity towards Freddy, and he wants to be not only the bass player, but he wants to be in the center stage. But now we get this explanation. If the storybook is to be believed and it's a true ending, then the original core 4 animatronics was never Freddy. It was Monty, Bonnie, Chica, and Fotsy. Freddy was a later addition that will later be at the center stage, have the franchise be named after him, and Monty pushed to the sideline, which would then explain why he wanted to be at center stage, why he has the animosity towards Freddy then, because, for lack of a better term, Freddy took that center stage away from him. This whole new Sun and Moon chapter of the lore is crazy. Yep. But I honestly love it because I get to talk about Sun and Moon more. And who doesn't love talking about Sun and Moon? The more you know the creepy gets to play, yeah, that is awesome. Because that's something that I talked about earlier in this stream of how this series is very, very dark. It has child murder, very violent spring lock suits that not only the spring lock mechanisms hug your body and basically not allow you to breathe, but any moisture that gets in the spring locks snap shut and skewer your body from the inside out. This series has a lot of very dark, twisted themes, right? The series did sensitize you a lot. But because it's all for like memes and jokes and, Freddy Fazbear and Bonnie the Bonnie Bun and Chica the Kitchen and Foxy the Pirate Roar, right? All these memes going on of this franchise. It desensitizes you a lot, and you're like, wait, the series is actually very dark and twisted, if you really think about it.
Themselves, I think, illuminate how we get to later games in the franchise. But for now, Moon.exe is a beast of enough itself. So what do you think? Did I hit the nail on the head?
Okay. And this is going to be the background because I want it to be, because I love this image. Okay, cool. So, anyways, that is the truth, the ending, the purpose of Moon.exe. Trying to think, what do I say for my closing thoughts? Because I feel like I said my closing thoughts while I was just talking about it. I guess, as always, can't wait for more theories. Can't wait for more theories just in FNAF in general, but also more FNAF theories on this game in particular, because I feel like we are only scratching the surface when it comes to this game. Like, very clearly, like I just mentioned, what ending is the real ending? Because I would say 3 endings of this game all have a purpose, all have a theme, and they all could be seen as. Hold up. Oh, that's even more slanted. That's a little bit better, but not really. Sorry. No, that's straight, I guess. Straight as it's gonna be anyway. But yeah, what was I saying? Oh yeah. Each of the 3 endings, they have a purpose, they have a theme, and they all have a purpose and they have an argument to be made. Yeah, this is the true ending. Um, and each have implication of what happens, right? Like, for instance, you just play through the game normally and you get, tricked by the Mimic software because you handed them the device that now has the executive permissions because you believe that you were talking to Fazbear the entire time, but really it was just the Mimic. Um, that has implications because not only does the character you play as die to the Mimic and he's attacked, and that's how it ends and everything, but you also see something that's very reminiscent of FNAF VR Help 101, where you are on stage at a Freddy Fazbear location, and I don't know if it's exactly inspiration from FNAF 1, but it has the same like black and white checkered pattern that we see in FNAF 1, but you're on stage in a Freddy animatronic, um, giving off the impression that you were stuffed inside that pizzeria that you will later go down into one of the other endings into the Mimic. But this is the bad ending where you were stuffed inside at least a prototype of a FNAF Freddy animatronic, which is bizarre. But then you get into the other endings. You have, once again, the bedroom one, where that has a ton of implications when it comes to Freddy being the face of the franchise versus Monty being the face of the franchise, and having a lot of context to Monty having animosity towards Freddy. And I guarantee you, if that is a true ending, then that makes me look at Security Breach, and especially all the digital messages that you get throughout the game talking about Monty being the bass player, Monty being the star, and having animosity towards Freddy. That, to me, I cannot look at that same again, right? Knowing what I know now in Mimic, in Secret the Mimic, right? So to me, I can't play I can't play or view Security Breach the same way again if that's the ending. Or we get to this ending where you say no to the protocol, and then by the Mimic lures you down into that pizzeria. Then you see the M2 creation, who once again is like some weird Frankenstein amalgamation of, a bunch of animatronics. And then that's where you would see the, Fiona, Mitz's machine, and then the place just gets burned down. So is that the true ending? Maybe. Maybe that's a true ending. To me, it's the most lore heavy and is the most dense, or not. Because at the same time, though, you get to Security Breach where you have the Afton ending, the Burn Trap ending with the Blob. That was the ending where, just like with the M2, that was the ending where it took the most for the player to get to that ending. But really, there was a different true ending the entire time. Because the true ending was believed to be Princess Quest. Burn Trap didn't have a factor at all. At least we believe that to be the case. So, I don't know. I guess that's something that we find out in a future theory video is what is the true ending for Seek of the Mimic? Let me know your thoughts, and I guess we'll find out for sure in a future video, and also any future Seek of the Mimic videos that come out. Because once again, I want to know everything I can about this game, because this game is very dense, but it's very complicated.